Well, hello everybody. Thank you all for coming to today's Tavola Aperta. Our guest today is Nancy Shaver from the United States. And she is exhibiting in this year's Biennale exhibition curated by Christine Massel in the Pavilion of Colors. So, welcome. Thank you for being our guest today. I invite everybody to participate in the conversation. Also, I invite everybody to eat and drink because it is a lunch. So please don't be shy and serve yourselves. And so, Nancy, tell us something about this exhibition.
Well, I will. I've taken a few notes. I've made some introduction, and then it amused me to make people I know talk about their involvement with the work. So I've asked the people who've come from the States and my sister who came from England to talk about their own involvement with the work. And I'm going to start reading because I wrote some things. First, I want to thank Christine Marcel for putting my work in this joyous assembly of work from everywhere. And next is a bit of a story. I believe in stories. We drove to Providence, Rhode Island to catch a flight from Boston to Venice the next day. I borrowed Zadie Smith's Changing My Mind, occasional essays, from my friend Lisa. I began reading it here, the last essay called Remembering. It is about David Foster Wallace, a contemporary writer. For Zadie Smith, he is the most important writer of our times. I believe in happenstance and accident as a tool, and this is an accident which I feel was very helpful to me. Jackson, will you keep that on the page by keeping touching that? The first thing in this book is what frames her work in the essay, and I think for me it frames what I understand Christine Marcel to be doing, but also to what I like to do as well. The first is, the time to make your mind up about people is never. That's Tracy Lord from the Philadelphia Story. Next is, you get to decide what to worship. That's David Foster Wallace. Thanks. The second thing is, I'm a collector of things, textiles, sometimes words. Here are some words I found on the way here, which is part of that. I'm a little off my schedule. And I thought this was Zadie Smith, but it's not. It's David Foster Wallace, but it's the both of them, because she chose it, so it doesn't matter to me. I'm no scholar. I've gotten convinced that there's something kind of timelessly vital and sacred about good writing. The thing doesn't have much to do with talent, even glittering talent. Talent's just an instrument. It's like having a pen that works instead of one that doesn't. I'm not saying I'm able to work consistently out of that premise, but it seems like the big distinction between good art and so-so art lies somewhere in the art's heart purpose, the agenda of the consciousness behind the text. It's got something to do with love, with having the discipline to talk out of that part of yourself that can love instead of the part that just wants to be loved. I know this doesn't sound hip at all, but it seems like one of the things that really great fiction writers do. From Carver to Chekhov to Flannery O'Connor, or like Tolstoy in The Death of Ivan Ilyich, or Pynchon of Gravity's Rainbow, is give the reader something. The reader walks away from the real art heavier than when she came into it, fuller. All the attention engagement and work you need to get from the reader can't be for your benefit. It's got to be for hers. What's poisonous about the cultural environment today is that it makes us so scary to try to carry out. And then there's one more thing that I happen on that I love. In 2005, Wallace gave a commencement speech at Kenyon College that begins this way. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" And ends like this. The capital T truth is about life before death. It's about the real value of real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with a simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water, this is water. It is unimaginably hard to do this, to stay conscious and alive in the adult world day in and day out. Okay, and then a little bit more. I'm a collector of things, textiles, and sometimes words. I said that. They're the words. Oh, I'm a little confused, but never mind. Then, about the installation, standardization, variation, and the idiosyncratic. I loved making the work, but possibly the install better, working with 3 other artists to actualize what had existed only in my imagination in a relatively small studio. We worked hard, all together, doing what as individuals we do best. The 3 people in the crew are John Jackson, Taylor Davis, and Robert Richburg. Sue Shart also helped with the photographs. I will tell you about them. John Jackson, my husband, an artist who makes funny sculptures out of anything metal. He believes in humor. He invented the rail system which holds the 8x10 panels for the wainscoting wall. I told him I needed a system which all these panels could hook on, slide along for easy removal, changing, looking. He did it and helped with everything else. The packing was massive. We only forgot 2 things, artist white tape and a little brown paint. They were not in the crate because I took them out to use them at home and forgot to repack them. Jackson, most importantly, taught me that art works on all levels of engagement. Next is Taylor Davis, who is not here. Taylor Davis is an artist I rely on for truthful assessment of how the work is working. One of my most relied on first viewers. She did the collage on the wainscoting wall. It is one of the first deciding factors of what the wall would look like. I met her in the Bard MFA program where I teach. She was one of my first students. She teaches at Massachusetts College of Art and is now the co-chair of the department I work in. Next is Robert Richburg. Robert is young, 27, a cartoonist. I met him through the Derek Eller Gallery. He helped install my first installation there. He is a wizard at measuring, making things straight, generous and kind. Jackson says Robert can outwork 3 people. This is all about stories. Where did this installation come from? It came from 40 years of wanting to write a novel on the wall through a visual experience. It came from looking at women's clothing, mass market garments for women who work, women in offices and shops, women who have jobs and families, women who are busy all the time working and doing, women who shop at Target and Walmart and Penny's. The installation came from the visual study of what is available for ordinary women, working women to wear, to work, for play, for dressing up. It came from the realization that a little leopard skin fabric goes a long way. Covers women of all ages, from babyhood to elders. It comes in all kinds of garments, under, over, year in and year out. It spans class and race. It is ubiquitous and defining, incredibly important as a statement. Next, it came from finding a plastic doll, head and shoulders, in a charity shop in Bolton, England. I am many, many years from playing with dolls, yet this one was so compelling, so strangely ordinary, I had to spend £1 to buy it and study it. It and the rag dolls, souvenirs from Chile, handmade out of ancient fabric, set the stage for the collaborative sculpture base. Handmade wallpaper by Don Cerny, a former student, is the beginning of that sculpture. Stories, and an aside here, I teach what I know from making art for the last 20 years in the MFA program at Bard College. I also have a shop in Hudson, New York. I sit there on weekends. I try to sell what I like. In between work, I'm in the studio, work and thinking about art. Stories. Marcel Duchamp somewhere said that art belongs at least half to the viewer. With that in mind, I have asked people I know who have traveled to see Viva Art to report their engagement with the work. Jackson used to comment that I was like Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer, getting other people to paint the fence. Here are the other people with their paintbrushes in their hand, ready to paint my fence. This is John Jackson, my husband.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I know, well, words are definitely extremely important for you, right? And I think you were really happy maybe with the idea of Christine Massel, of the unpacking of my library. Are you going to add a book to that, or?
Oh, well, there are untold number of books that could be added to that, you know. Every time I pick a book up, it could be added. Certainly Zadie Smith could be added to that list.
Yes, and Jackson, did you want to say something?
Oh, do you need to? Mm-hmm.
Buongiorno. My name is John Jackson, Nancy's husband, armature maker, part-time art installer, problem solver, key finder, and, until we came to Venice, Nancy's personal GPS system. However, Venice has totally destroyed my previous ability to get from point A to point B. It took me 3 days before I got from our hotel to the Arsenal without getting lost. But at least I did not have to worry about getting run over by a car or a truck. That is a really nice feature of Venice, because no cars or trucks. My attempts at art are welded sculptures from old tools and bike parts that are mostly figurative, humorous, and political. The gist of my sculptures can be grasped immediately, whereas Nancy's work requires more thoughtful contemplation. I think of her work as Rorschach drawing, painting, sculpture, puzzle contraptions that raise more questions than they answer. Often, when I come into the house, into her studio from my welding shop, Nancy will point to her latest work and ask, talk about it. What do you see? Where do your eyes go first, second, and third? Coming from my usual 11-year-old perspective or sensibility, I look for faces or animal shapes first and a strong color. The abstract often gives me more trouble, but occasionally there is a breakthrough, and Nancy gives me a metaphorical gold star. Lately, I hesitate to talk about any perceived animal shapes in her work, since there have been times in the past when I saw a dog shape in her work that she subsequently altered to the sad disappearance of the dog. Within the past couple of years, Nancy has raided my metal pile and made good use of my metal silo hoops. To get the shapes she desired, I straightened out metal coat hanger wire, and Nancy then bent the straightened coat hangers into the shapes she wanted. I then used the coat hanger as a model for bending the half-inch thick silo hoops in my shop vise, using a larger pipe for leverage. Occasionally, Nancy will spot a shape in my shop that I had overlooked and suggest how I might use it for one of my own figures. Her most recent suggestion was to use a metal turtle-shaped ashtray from the 1950s as a base for a juggling acrobat. At first, I was reluctant, but then decided to do one for her to show her I was not totally obstinate. After I completed the piece, I really liked it, and it has subsequently inspired other turtle-related pieces, including one in which Myrtle the turtle is at the steering wheel of a drag racer. Much of my work inspires haiku, and here's the following about Myrtle. Myrtle the turtle, tired of coming in dead last, leaves hair in the dust. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And the next person, probably the longest influence in my life of art and reading, is my sister Elaine, who lives in Bolton, Manchester.
Well, it's a great privilege and pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. My family and I have spent years looking at Nancy's work and inspecting her collections. Ugly vases, ugly lamps, utilitarian, sometimes beautiful work-related objects. Wooden cases related to printing, and metal rings, which are part of meat grinders, and they chop meat into different sorts of fineness of grounds. And the textiles, of course. Nancy started off as a photographer. There was quite a long spell of photographs of children's T-shirts. At some stage, the pictures became less realistic and more collage-like. And then she started paying equal attention to the frames as what was inside them. So somewhere in the world is a photograph someone bought, which has on it one of my children's blue Clark shoes. She was age 3 at the time. I don't know where in the world it is, but Nancy, as you might have gathered from her talk, takes an enormous pleasure in the making of her work, and the pleasure is contagious. Sometimes we've been lucky enough to take part in wrapping fabric around wooden blocks, but I don't think any of our efforts have been successful enough to be used because we didn't do the job good enough. Nancy's anticipation of viewers' reactions make her cackle with amusement and delight. I learned and relearned things about Nancy's art when I went to the Arsenal yesterday. Some of the fabrics are so hideous, both visually and in texture, they make me want to throw up. But as part of a collection, they become something else. How does she do that?
We'll ask her later.
Yeah. I could give some hints, but I think it's best to ask her, perhaps. I'm sure you all have ideas, too. Nancy likes brights, and she likes shiny, but both have to be tightly controlled. That's another thing I noticed. And some of her art has a surprising viciousness about it, I think. I'm thinking of the fabric on legs and the metal things. The art is political, which is something I'd forgotten. It's political in the choice of things as well as in other ways, and perhaps we could ask her about that too. Nancy, as you've heard, has always had an interest in words. If you've seen her show, you will have noticed a big green sign saying sweet corn, tomatoes, and veggies. We all like sweet corn in our family. Our parents grew it in the garden, and it's sold in roadside stands all over our part of the state. I suspect the sign is in the show because Nancy liked the look of it, but Nancy's subtle as well. She likes a joke. Maybe the sign is showing the way to some virtual sweet corn in every sense. Or maybe there's some essential nourishment to be had there. That's what I think. I'd like to close with a very few thoughts from my husband, who couldn't be here. Nancy's a modernist, but not. Nancy's art is folksy, but not. Nancy's work celebrates rural life and found objects, but not. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, am I? All right. And then I have the pleasure of having here Derek Eller, who's taken to showing my work, and Abby Messinet, a director, and I'm very curious as to what they see.
Okay. I didn't prepare anything, unlike the three of you, because I'm not very good at that. But it's interesting. I think you were, I don't know if it was David Foster Wallace or something that you read earlier, but you talked about those who have the ability to love versus those who, I guess, what was the quote? Something about those who need love or seek out love?
It was, yes, that's close enough.
But I think that one of the things that really sort of has always struck me about your work is just I guess a real sort of honesty and believability, and I'm able to sort of tap into your love for the materials, for the objects you make, and that to me is super meaningful because I feel like there's so much art that seems like it's made to be loved, and it feels like it's made for consumption, and I feel like you're making work for a very different reason. And I also feel like, I've only worked with you for 2 years, and I feel like I'm trying to get to know you as a person, and that you seem to be, your art is almost more straightforward than you as a person, I think. And your art has complexity as well, but I also feel like your art has a certain openness and a vulnerability, and I can see your thought process when I look at the work. And I like that. I like how, to me, it's very accessible, and it's also mysterious at the same time, and that I can think about your, the decision-making process that goes on when I look at it. And it has a warmth to it, and also it's playful and fun and visually exciting for me to look at. And again, it's also discordant, but with sort of beautiful melodic passages, and it's very musical to me, to me too, and that appeals to me as well. Anyway.
Okay.
And then
Yeah, I would just add too that beyond the musical, the literary I think is so interesting too, and to hear what you said about writing a novel on the wall, I have not heard something like that before come out of your mouth, but it makes perfect sense to me. And I guess when I sort of look at the larger installation here and the one that you did at our gallery last summer, that there's a kind of like a statement being made, and that there are certain objects perhaps that become the nouns and the verbs, and then other things that you have find that you add that become adjectives and adverbs to really fill
out this, you know, beautiful declaration of who you are. You know, that's something I think that's very appealing to me about the work, having just really known the discrete objects prior to then seeing you actually make an installation on 2 occasions. So, but I think maybe one thing, in just in terms of handing the paintbrush back to you, how do you see the discrete objects that you make in relationship to the work of other people, in relationship? Is there weight that you put on one above the other?
Well, it's been very confusing since last June when I made that first giant installation at the gallery, because as much as I loved making discrete objects, right after that show, discrete objects had no lure for me, and it was pretty frightening to think that I had opened up this new can of worms, and to think that I would always want to make these installations that relied on other people when I had no interest in say, 40 years with working with other people. So I'm hoping that I can find a balance, and I'm happy to say at this point I have gone back to making discrete small objects, and it is pleasing, so that's good. And I thought there's another person here who could speak. Her name is Elise Rowan, and she volunteered to help me in my installation. She's a former student, and she knows me as a teacher, and I thought it would be good for her to say something from how she knows me.
Hi, my name is Elise Ronayne, and I met Nancy in 2012, but I'd heard about your work, I think in 2010. I was introduced to it by a former Bard student who I met at a residency and saw my work and was like, how do you not know Nancy Shaver? So I kind of found Nancy's work by Googling her, which kind of prompted me to apply to Bard and then study with her. When I started at Bard, my work was very much presenting itself as painting, and I was completely frustrated because I always wanted my work to have this autonomy and be able to stand up, literally. So when I got to Bard, I was in the painting department, but found myself very much in the sculpture department all the time. And the first time I had a studio visit with Nancy, I was so excited. I eagerly signed up with her maybe the first week of school. And she came into my studio. She very quickly identified the problems, told me my studio was a mess, and went out for lunch, and I was left in tears by myself. I quickly signed up for another studio visit with her at the end of the summer to kind of prove myself and show her where I had gotten. And I think that our kind of friendship has developed from there. Last summer, I worked closely with Nancy while installing this large quilt installation at Derek's gallery. And I feel like that was actually a really great learning experience for me because I saw Nancy mentally and physically assembling her work. So this kind of level of specificity that I'd seen in her work, I kind of saw it came to life. And I think the biggest part of that, the quilt installation, was that it kind of taught me that Nancy doesn't reach for something. She kind of utilizes the things and the people that are around her already, and those energies are what comprises the dynamism of her work. So I kind of had taken some notes, but you can see Nancy's learned knowledge, and it manifests in those discrete objects that she makes as well as the installation. So thanks for having me, Nancy.
So now I have a question. So how was the making of this Biennale? How did you get here? Did you already know Christine Marcel? Did she contact you? How did everything happen?
Well, she contacted me, and it seems like she had seen an installation at Greater New York, which was a much, much more concise, very small installation that I had done there. And then I met her at Frieze, and we just had this wonderful conversation about the possibility of art. And that was that. And in fact, because I'm not a big computer user, I had not been in contact with her throughout this whole...
Maybe a performance back there.
through this whole time. And it was a little scary and also wonderful because I assumed she must have trusted me if I didn't hear from her. And we got here, and it was very, very stressful for me and Jackson getting ready for this because I've never planned anything this giant. And then to have to plan the packing, and then to do paperwork, which I hate more than anything. I'd rather do anything than paperwork. And so it was all very unknown and very, very difficult. And the boxes went off before I had figured out what I wanted on one wall, which was the green ribbon wall, which was the hardest wall to do. I had figured a structure, and pretty much that structure worked. But then the second day, there was a lot of confusion, and I was pretty upset, and I kept shouting at Taylor, "Taylor, I'm blind! I'm blind, I can't see." And so she would say, "Well, just start putting things on the wall. Just put it on the..." So we did that, and then, of course, it all worked out. And I had to remind myself that being flexible is what is the most important and the most useful.
I have a question about, I mean, it seems that your teaching informs a lot of your practice and over many decades, and I was wondering, you know, what is your perspective on your students? I mean, you seem to have been pretty tough with Alice there when you first met her, but then I guess, you know, that brought, you know, many, you know, then it evolved from there. So basically, do you recognize yourself in your students? Do you identify with them?
Teaching is one of the most important things that I have done, and the most rewarding things that I have done, because it is a way to flexibility, and it is meeting many, many people, mostly young people, who have many different ideas about work. And I have to look at the work seriously and be generous, even if it's nothing that I personally am interested in. And that kind of rigor has been incredibly helpful and important to my life. And I feel like it is I who have had a 20-year education through teaching. And you know, and I'm afraid I do give people trouble.
Going back to books, tell us something, because I noticed there are sort of 3 different kinds of books you put in your Unpacking the Library. One, 2 by Virginia Woolf, and then one by George Perec. And the other one is Walker Evans, right? There are 3 different things. Tell us something about that. How did you choose them, since you read so much? Was it difficult?
Yes, it was very, very difficult. And it's sort of remembering who you are in the past and who you are at 71, and where different people have fit in that scale. And say Walker Evans' book and work was...
Did you meet him? Maybe?
Yes. I didn't get into Yale, but I ordered a course there with him, and so I had the best education in the world in that I went to this class, and then we became friends because he is a collector and a junker. So we went out on various trips, and he was also an amazing reader. And he would say he read X or Y or Z, and I said, so I would read it, and then I would know exactly why he liked X, Y, or Z. So it was just so wonderful. all of that. And then Perec. I have this unending, voracious appetite for objects. And at that point, it was much bigger than it is now. And I can never see enough of anything. I made Jackson and Elaine go by those flea market tables out on the walk here, just in case there's something that was just fabulous I couldn't leave behind. And then George Perec did this something that I felt like I really, really, really wanted to do. He described everything down to the burnt matches on a table. He described everything on a table in the books. And that's what I love, the descriptions of things, the descriptions of room. I'm afraid I really didn't give a damn about the story in a way and about the search and blah, blah, blah. But, oh, boy, that was the best thing in the world to read those descriptions of things. And then Virginia Woolf, it was the sound of a woman's voice that I recognized. And so that was incredibly important to me. And her book of one's own and the need for privacy and a place to work, I think, is a major factor in working.
So where do you work? Your studio.
Yes, my studio.
Where do you keep all the stuff you collect?
My studio, we built it off the kitchen, and it's not very big. It's about the shape of it's a beautiful shape of a shoebox, that kind of proportion. And there's one wall that is a picture wall that has plywood in back of it. And I sit in a chair and I stare at this wall. That's my studio. And what else? What other?
I don't remember anymore.
Right.
Is there music in your studio? Is there music in your daily?
No, there's not. There used to be, but not anymore. I don't know why. It just happened, and I just love sitting in the studio in my chair, looking at this wall, and perhaps not doing anything, but perhaps doing something.
Sure. And when you read, do you ever read aloud?
No. As you could tell, I'm a terrible reader of aloud. No.
Will you listen to the radio?
Yeah, I listen probably to NPR almost all the time, and because of our lives today, I listen to news constantly, which is not very good.
So, and about, there is some political also involvement in your work. Can you tell us something about that?
I'd say whatever political involvement with the work comes from really specifically knowing the materials. And from that, I have learned, every time I learn more about the situation, say, I live in, and using all those sort of nasty fabrics that come from women's clothing that I find in the local Salvation Army or the store in the local town called Core Values has made me realize how more and more, as if I didn't know already, but more and more and more and more specifically, how women are less than, say, this lettuce leaf to industry in terms of thinking about them, and they don't, it's less than this. All the industry wants is women's money to buy over and over and over again these cheap materials to use in clothing. And I have a very good friend who is a fabric designer, and she told me in 1860, around that era, there were many, many, many exciting, unusual fabrics for women for clothing, because the clothing was made by tailors all over, and they'd all buy separate lots of very few things. So it's an amazing thing that it's gone from being something really, from that to what we see on the wall there.
Okay. Are there any?
I just have one last question. I mean, it seems like the sense of humor and humor in general plays a big role in your life, probably, but definitely in your work for sure. And I was wondering, because we often don't talk enough about humor and sense of humor and being, irony in artworks and in artist practice. And I was wondering, is that a conscious decision or is that something that comes natural to you?
I think I always like to try to see things from as many different directions as I can. And of course, there's always blind spots. It's not possible to see behind you, but I think that's where it all comes from. And I do enjoy sort of my own jokes that are embedded in the work. And I don't feel like I'm involved in irony. Feel like more I'm involved in the kind of reality that it's like a pebble in the water that goes out, moves out, and moves out. And there are all kinds of different aspects to that. And I think from Virginia Woolf, I'm most interested now in getting as many threads as humanly possible into one exhibit, and it's why there were hundreds of things for you to unpack.
Could you tell us more about the collecting of other people's work? And because you collected, you were also a curator because you put the work together, including your own work, which is a very different experiment. So could you tell us more about that?
It all comes from this idea of writing a novel on the wall, and I'm limited in what I could present, and I wanted to present other characters, so the other artists represent, in fact, other characters that I could not be. And also, it comes from my consciousness of being an artist for probably getting to be 50 years now, about how difficult it is for artists to find audience of any sort for their work, always, and how important that is, and that feeling a bit of responsibility in terms of having taught for 20 years and maybe had, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of students who are wanting the same things I want. And so it was a great pleasure to be able to insert their work into this bigger picture that I am interested in. And artists who perhaps I have nothing to do with, but I truly respect their engagement of art and how that they have engineered their lives to go around art, regardless of what success means. So all of that is the reason for it. And like I say, it's become so, I guess, mesmerizing that I began to, as I say, doubt my own interest in discrete objects. But I hope to always do both now.
Can you please take the microphone?
Oh. I think my career has been long and very, 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 very slow. I think I have not realized the importance of articulation to myself, what I'm doing, and then because I haven't articulated that, I haven't been able to articulate it to anyone who I would want to be an audience. And it's taken me forever to learn how to do that. And I think teaching is one of the things that has taught me to do that, teaching and reading. I remember earlier on carrying around this, I was making this really odd work, carrying around this portfolio of photographs that were sandwiched between glass and then framed, and then there was little stuff on the frame. And I would be carrying it, and people wouldn't know what to think of it, and I wouldn't know what to tell them. And I carried it on the subway, and the glass all broke. And I opened the book, and I said, "Oh, it doesn't matter." Like, and you know, it's just taken a long, long, long time for me to articulate.
I don't know, is it working? Maybe it's on mute. No. It's working, it's working. Yeah.
Of your work.
I'm sorry,
Because-
my ears are bad. I can't hear.
Okay, yeah, okay, this works. I have a question about the aesthetic aspect of your work, because your installations are so beautiful, so colorful, and so there's a feminine aspect actually very strong. So I would like to know how did you deal maybe with this kind of critics about being a woman artist that create works with textures and that are even very decorative?
Of course, that can always be a sore subject. But I believe at this point in history, more and more people are willing to understand perhaps the importance of a feminine point of view and the domestic without being pejorative. Artists like Matisse got away with using it always, always, always. And now it's time for women to be able to be allowed to use it.
Okay. One, I don't know if it's the last question, or maybe somebody else has something. But okay, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, Nancy. I just have, I want to come back maybe to the articulation of your work that you mentioned. I'm interested to know, if you want to share it, of course, if anything, if there's an element or a person of any book that you read that helped you in getting into your career and your more serious work faster, or did something inspire you further to get there to your practice?
I don't think so. I think it's just this growing, mushrooming working that leads to something else. I don't have any plan, you know, and it works or it doesn't work, and I'm very, very stubborn, and that's part of my trouble. I would never do anything I didn't want to, so that's why I'm 71. And I think both the installation at Derek Eller and the one here are very, very surprising to me, because I've never intended to make anything big. I've never wanted to make anything big. And then I've made these two enormous things. You know, for Jackson's sake, I'm going to try and not do it again. But I will do it again.
But it was a good experience then.
Oh, this has been just the best experience. Thank you.
Depends on whether for you or Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson has another voice.
Last question about the collection of objects, of your objects, is a bit more similar to a sort of scientific taxonomy, you know, scientific list of objects, or it's something more compulsive, you know, that you had object every time, in a sense, in your private collection of objects. It's something more scientific? So you describe and you organize scientifically all these objects in families, in groups, in a sort of taxonomy, or it's something that it's an open collection without, any type of idea or
I
family?
think it could be called that, amateurish as it is, in terms of being interested in people and places and maybe archaeology, and really thinking seriously about that doll that came from England and what that means. It's a blonde-headed doll. And then thinking about the little dolls from Chile that are so beautiful in contrast to that doll. So there is the wider world that could be scientific that comes into the first choices for the reasons why things are there. And that particular sculpture, which I call Base, came totally through a collaboration with a former student, Dawn Cerny, who made that wallpaper that I thought was so fantastic and I wanted to use. And that defined that sculpture.
And, well, I wanted to ask you, how much time do you spend at flea markets looking at things? How do you do that? Is it random, organized? Do you look up, have a calendar? I have to go there this day, there.
Well, since working on this installation and a few before it, I'm afraid I've given up. I don't have time anymore to look the way I used to. When I was more relaxed, whenever I was in the studio and didn't know what to do or was frustrated, I would say to Jackson, I need to look at something. And so we would go out and look around wherever we could, spend a day or so, and then I would buy whatever I wanted for my shop. And I would be so happy. But it hasn't happened lately at all because I don't have time and I really, really miss it. And as soon as I get back, I'm going to go to the best flea market in the world, which is Elephant's Trunk in Connecticut. And I never look for anything. I'm just wanting to see what's there.
Okay. So,
one question. Hi, Marina. And are you taking with you anything from Venice?
I'm looking for something to take from Venice. In our lost wanderings, we found this junk shop, and I was so excited because there was something in the window I wanted, and it wasn't open. And I just told Jackson he has to get me back there because I want to go in it.
But his GPS is not getting him back there. Until when are you staying?
We're leaving on Sunday morning.
Okay. No, it was just if we find flea markets, we'll email you the addresses.
Oh, good.
There's a big one starting today. Actually.
Oh, yes, where is it?
In Campo San Maurizio.
Yeah,
it's
it's near the Academia Bridge, not far from the Academia Bridge.
Good. I'll remember. Okay. That's the thing that's so funny, that I can't get from A to B. I can't get out of a paper bag in terms of direction, but I can remember every junk store I've been to and where it is.
Okay. So, one last question.
Yeah, it's just a quick silly question. So, when you used to look around the flea markets, were you more concerned about how the object looked or the story that can carry with it? I mean, maybe you can see, I don't know, any piece that is not interesting look-wise, but it comes from, as you say, a dog that comes from England, or a piece of wood that was part of a train that went across the Wild West. I mean, for you it's more important the look of it or the story behind?
I think the most important thing is the visual attraction to it. And I realize that I think I have a really fine eye at this point. and it's maybe my only skill in, and I really developed it. And then after that comes the story. And as I say, I have this shop where I try to sell things that I like on the weekends. That's my job. And a lot of times I will buy on occasion, not a lot of times. On occasion I will buy something for Henry, my shop. I will take it to the shop and then I'll say, oh no, this thing has jumped categories. This is not a Henry item. This is going to go into my art item. I'm going to use this in art. And that green sign, tomatoes, that's a Henry item. That's from my shop.
And is it on sale?
Yes, it is for sale.
So we will have to come to Henry to buy
it.
Okay.
If you buy it here, she won't have to ship it home.
And either will you.
So we get a discount.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions? Because I think our time is starting to be up. I'd really like to thank you for being here with us today, everybody, also John Jackson, your sister, and all our guests together. It was a wonderful lunch. I hope you all enjoyed it. And we have another appointment with the Tavola Aperta tomorrow with artist Koki Tanaka. I hope you enjoyed the exhibition and your stay in Venice, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Okay.
Thank you all so much. Well, good.